I knew dealing with the HOA was going to be a nightmare, but I never expected Karren Whitmore to be this ridiculous. She was exactly what you'd imagine mid-50s, bleach blonde bob, and a permanent scowl like she was constantly smelling something foul. As the self-appointed queen of the neighborhood, she ran the HOA with an iron fist, issuing fines for the most absurd reasons. I had mostly ignored her over the years. My family had lived in this neighborhood for decades, and we had owned our home long before Karren and her HOA cronies started their nonsense. But when she canceled my family reunion, an event we'd been planning for over a year, she made a serious mistake. She claimed it was because of anticipated noise, even though the reunion hadn't even happened yet. No warnings, no discussions, just an abrupt email from the HOA stating that our permit to use the neighborhood clubhouse was revoked. Of course, Karren had no problem approving her own events, like the HOA's annual gala, which was just an excuse for her and her friends to drink overpriced wine and gossip about everyone else. I confronted her about it, standing right there on her perfectly manicured lawn. "You can't just cancel an event because you feel like it," I told her. Karren folded her arms, her lips curling into that smug little grin she always wore when she thought she had power over someone. "Oh, but I can. The HOA has the right to revoke any permits at our discretion. And frankly, your family's little get-together would be disruptive to the community." I clenched my jaw. "We've had this reunion here for years without a problem." "Well, things change. Maybe a quieter gathering next time," she said, turning away as if the conversation was over. That was it. That was the moment I decided I was done playing nice. Karren had been lording over this neighborhood for too long, treating people like pawns in her little power game. But what she didn't know is that I had been making some serious business moves in the past year, moves that gave me the leverage to end her reign once and for all. Because what Karren failed to realize was that I had just bought the entire neighborhood. I stood on Karren's front lawn, watching her retreat into her pristine house, completely unaware of the storm that was about to hit her. She thought she had the final say, that her little fiefdom was untouchable. But she had no idea that the ground beneath her feet was already crumbling. I had spent the last year making investments, quietly purchasing properties in the neighborhood through various LLCs. It started as a way to secure rental income, but when I realized just how much influence the HOA had, I saw an opportunity. Several homeowners, tired of Karren's nonsense, had been eager to sell, and I had been just as eager to buy. As of last month, I officially owned the majority of the homes in the neighborhood, which granted me voting power over the HOA itself. But I wasn't about to reveal my hand just yet. No, I wanted Karren to dig her own grave first. The first step was making sure my family reunion happened as planned. If Karren thought she could cancel it with a simple email, she was in for a rude awakening. I headed straight to the county records office, where I confirmed what I already suspected. The HOA didn't actually own the clubhouse. The land and building were still under the original developer's name, and the HOA had merely been managing it under a long-expired agreement. That meant Karren had no legal authority to cancel anything. I made a few calls, hired a real estate attorney, and by the end of the day, I had officially leased the clubhouse directly from the developer. Karren couldn't stop my family reunion now, even if she tried. The next morning, I made sure she found out in the most satisfying way possible. While she was out power walking with her usual group of minions, I had a crew set up banners and tables at the clubhouse. When she saw the decorations going up, she marched over, her face already turning red. She demanded to know who authorized the setup. I simply handed her a copy of my lease agreement and walked away before she could gather her thoughts enough to argue. But I wasn't done yet. With my newfound control over the neighborhood, it was time to dismantle Karren's stranglehold once and for all. That evening, I called for an emergency HOA meeting. My ownership stake meant I could override Karren's usual tactics of ignoring resident concerns. Every homeowner was invited, and I made sure to spread the word that something big was about to change. By the time the meeting started, the room was packed. People who had been too afraid to speak up before were now whispering excitedly, sensing that something was different. Karren sat at the front, clearly irritated, her fingers tapping impatiently on the table. I didn't waste any time. I stood up, cleared my throat, and addressed the room. In the past year, I've been purchasing properties in this neighborhood, I said. As of last month, I own the majority of them. That gives me the right to call for a vote on HOA leadership. The room erupted into murmurs. Karren's face paled, but she quickly forced a laugh, waving a dismissive hand. She claimed my purchases didn't matter, that the HOA's bylaws prevented a single owner from having too much influence. That's when I pulled out the documents. I had spent the last week reviewing every line of the HOA's bylaws, and I had found a loophole. The original rules stated that any homeowner with a majority stake could call for an immediate vote of no confidence in the board. The rule had likely been written when the neighborhood was first built, back when no one expected a single owner to hold so many properties. But there it was in black and white. I turned to the residents. We all know how Karren has run this HOA. She fines people unfairly, cancels events she doesn't like, and makes decisions without consulting the community. If you're tired of it, now is your chance to change things. One by one, hands started going up. People who had been too intimidated before were finally speaking out. They shared stories of ridiculous fines, unapproved changes to the budget, and outright favoritism. Karren tried to fight back, claiming the meeting wasn't official, that the vote wouldn't count. But no one was listening anymore. They had waited too long for this moment. When the votes were counted, it wasn't even close. Karren and her cronies were out. The room erupted into cheers, but I wasn't done yet. I had one final blow to deliver. I announced that, effective immediately, the HOA fees would be cut in half. The excessive fines? Voided. The ridiculous rules Karren had enforced? Gone. I was implementing a new, fair system, one that actually served the residents, not a power-hungry dictator. Karren stood there, stunned, as the reality sank in. Her reign was over. As she stormed out of the meeting, I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. She had spent years making people miserable, convinced she was untouchable. But in the end, she had been brought down by the very people she had tried to control. And my family reunion? It went off without a hitch. The aftermath of Karren's downfall was nothing short of spectacular. The HOA board was in complete disarray, her former allies scrambling to distance themselves from the disaster. Some resigned immediately, hoping to avoid any further humiliation, while others desperately tried to negotiate their way into the new leadership structure. None of it worked. The community had spoken, and they were done with the old regime. The first order of business was making sure every last trace of Karren's influence was erased. I had already voided the excessive fines and slashed the bloated HOA fees, but there was still more damage to undo. Over the years, Karren had implemented a series of ridiculous rules, some of them downright absurd. One homeowner told me he had been fined for leaving his trash bin out 5 minutes past the collection time. Another had been penalized for having a garden gnome that didn't match the neighborhood aesthetic. The more I listened, the more I realized just how deep her control had gone. I called for another meeting, and this time it was different. Instead of a tense, fearful atmosphere, people arrived excited, hopeful even. For the first time in years, they had a say in how their own neighborhood was run. We took a vote on every single rule Karren had put in place, and with each one we eliminated, the mood in the room lifted. The rule about approved holiday decorations? Gone. The absurd parking restrictions? Erased. The mandate that all home exteriors be repainted every 3 years, regardless of condition? Abolished. With every decision, the weight of Karren's reign became more apparent. She had built her power on micromanaging every aspect of people's lives, using rules as a weapon to control them. But now, all of that was crumbling. Of course, Karren herself wasn't taking it well. She had been unusually quiet in the days following the vote, But that changed when I received a legal notice in the mail. It was a desperate, last-ditch attempt to regain some level of control. She was suing the HOA, claiming that the vote to remove her was invalid and that she had been unfairly ousted. I had expected this. People like Karren never accepted defeat gracefully. I handed the notice over to my attorney, who barely glanced at it before shaking his head. "This is nonsense," he said. "She has no legal standing. The vote was conducted properly, the bylaws support your authority, and she has no claim to any damages. She's grasping at straws." I wasn't worried, but I wasn't about to let her keep causing problems either. So, I decided to do something that Karren would never have expected. I paid her a visit. When she opened the door, she was clearly caught off guard. Her usual air of superiority was gone, replaced with something closer to desperation. Her house, once the perfect image of HOA-approved perfection, looked different now. The once pristine lawn was slightly overgrown, the flower beds neglected. It was subtle, but it told me everything I needed to know. Karren was unraveling. She didn't invite me in, of course. She just stood there, arms crossed, waiting for me to speak. "You can drop the lawsuit," I said. "It won't go anywhere, and you know it." Her jaw tightened, but she didn't respond. I continued. "You've lost, Karren. The neighborhood is moving on whether you like it or not. But if you insist on dragging this out, it won't end well for you." She let out a bitter laugh. "You think you've won, don't you? Just because you bought your way in, you think you understand this neighborhood." I met her gaze. "I understand that people were tired of being treated like they were living under a dictatorship. And I understand that you built your power on fear. But that's gone now." Her posture stiffened. "This neighborhood was perfect before you started meddling. You're going to turn it into a disaster." I shook my head. "No, Karren. We're turning it into a community again." She had no comeback for that. She just stood there, gripping the edge of her doorframe like it was the only thing keeping her upright. "You have a choice," I said. "You can keep fighting and lose everything, or you can walk away with whatever dignity you have left." She didn't respond, but I could see it in her eyes. She knew she had already lost. The lawsuit was quietly dropped a few days later. Karren stopped showing up to community events, and before long, a for sale sign appeared in front of her house. The neighborhood thrived in her absence. With the oppressive rules gone, people started rebuilding the sense of community that Karren had spent years destroying. Neighbors who had barely spoken before were now organizing block parties, helping each other with home projects, and actually enjoying where they lived. The best part? My family reunion went off without a hitch. As I stood in the clubhouse, watching my relatives laughing and catching up, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of satisfaction. Karren had tried to ruin this, had tried to hold on to her power at any cost. But in the end, she had only destroyed herself. And the neighborhood? It was finally free. With Karren gone, the transformation of the neighborhood picked up speed. The suffocating atmosphere she had cultivated for years had finally lifted, and for the first time in recent memory, people felt comfortable making their homes their own again. The changes were immediate and satisfying. Yards that had been forced into sterile uniformity now flourished with personality. A retired firefighter down the street put up a flagpole he had been fined for before. A young couple painted their front door a deep red, something Karren had explicitly banned as too aggressive. Even the local kids seemed freer, playing in front yards without the lingering threat of an HOA enforcer lurking nearby. Meanwhile, I made sure to follow through on my promises. The HOA, now under new leadership with a board actually elected by the homeowners, set about restructuring its priorities. Instead of focusing on pointless fines and arbitrary restrictions, we shifted efforts toward actual improvements. A long overdue street repaving project was finally approved. The community pool, which Karren had restricted access to under an absurdly exclusive membership system, was reopened to all residents. The security cameras she had installed not for safety, but for surveillance of rule violations were repurposed for actual neighborhood security rather than spying on people's lawns. As I expected, not everyone adjusted to the change smoothly. A few of Karren's former loyalists tried to resist, clinging to the old ways. One elderly couple, notorious for reporting anyone who dared leave their trash bin out an extra hour, complained about the new relaxed rules. They feared the neighborhood would spiral into chaos without Karren's strict oversight. But their concerns quickly faded when they saw that, instead of devolving, the community actually thrived. Still, not all resistance was passive. One afternoon, as I was reviewing some of the HOA's financial records, I came across something troubling. Buried deep within the paperwork was a series of payments that didn't add up. Karren had always been secretive about the HOA's finances, but now that I had full access, I saw why. There were multiple transactions labeled as maintenance expenses that had no actual work attached to them. Thousands of dollars had been funneled into vague accounts with no clear purpose. I brought in an accountant to dig deeper, and what we found was worse than I had anticipated. Karren had been siphoning HOA funds into a private slush account for years. Under the guise of landscape improvements and administrative costs, she had been paying herself and a few select board members generous stipends under the table. Even more outrageous, she had been using HOA funds to finance events for her personal social circles, billing them as community gatherings when in reality, they had been exclusive parties for her friends. Armed with this information, I called for another meeting. This time, it wasn't just about policy changes, it was about justice. The homeowners deserved to know how their money had been used against them. The turnout was even larger than before. Word had spread quickly, and people came eager to learn the full extent of Karren's misdeeds. As I presented the findings, the mood in the room shifted from shock to outrage. Homeowners who had been struggling with rising fees and unexplained fines now understood where their money had been going. The betrayal was staggering. One resident, a single mother who had nearly lost her home over unpaid HOA fines, stood up and demanded to know if there was any way to recover the stolen funds. That was the moment I had been waiting for. I had already consulted with legal experts, and I had good news. Since Karren's misappropriation of funds was well documented and clearly fraudulent, the HOA had grounds to pursue legal action against her. The homeowners wasted no time voting to move forward with a lawsuit. But I had one more card to play. I had also reached out to local law enforcement, and they were very interested in what we had uncovered. Fraud on this scale wasn't just a civil matter, it was a criminal offense. The next morning, as I was sipping my coffee and enjoying the sight of a neighborhood finally free from Karren's grip, I saw something that made the victory even sweeter. A police cruiser pulled up in front of Karren's house. Even though she had already listed it for sale, she hadn't managed to leave town just yet. I didn't need to watch to know what was happening inside. The authorities had everything they needed. The fraudulent payments, the misused funds, the financial records that painted a clear picture of embezzlement, it was all airtight. An hour later, Karren was escorted out in handcuffs. The neighborhood watched in stunned silence, but I could see the relief in their faces. Justice had finally caught up with her. With Karren officially out of the picture, the community flourished. The HOA, now run by people who actually cared about the residents, focused on making real improvements. People who had once been afraid to speak up now actively participated in meetings, shaping the future of the neighborhood instead of being ruled by it. The best part? The family reunion that had started this whole ordeal became an annual tradition, growing bigger each year. As I stood among my relatives, watching kids run around the freshly renovated clubhouse, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of satisfaction. Karren had tried to control everything, believing she was untouchable. But in the end, she had been undone by her own greed. And the neighborhood she had once ruled with an iron fist? It was finally a place people were proud to call home. With Karren gone and her corruption exposed, the neighborhood finally settled into a period of long overdue peace. The relief was palpable. People who had once walked on eggshells, fearing arbitrary fines or sudden rule changes, now felt free to enjoy their homes without interference. The air felt lighter, the atmosphere friendlier. Where people had once avoided each other to prevent HOA drama, now they were stopping to chat, forming real connections. But while Karren was out of the picture, her actions had left scars that needed healing. The financial damage she had inflicted on the HOA was deeper than most had realized. The lawsuit against her was progressing, and with the evidence stacked against her, it was only a matter of time before she was held fully accountable. However, recovering the stolen funds wouldn't happen overnight. In the meantime, we had to find a way to stabilize the HOA's finances without burdening homeowners with more fees. That was where my business experience came in handy. I worked closely with the new board to restructure the budget, cutting unnecessary expenses and renegotiating overpriced service contracts that Karren had suspiciously arranged with her personal connections. The security companies she had hired, which charged ridiculous rates for next to no actual service, was the first to go. In its place, we established a community-wide security initiative, installing motion-activated lighting and working with local law enforcement for regular patrols. The landscaping contract was another major issue. Karren had handpicked a company owned by one of her close friends, and they had been charging the HOA nearly double the standard rate. We replaced them with a reliable company that did better work for a fraction of the cost. The extra funds went toward long-overdue maintenance projects, like repairing the crumbling sidewalks and upgrading the community pool's filtration system. With every change, we chipped away at the inefficient, self-serving system Karren had built. And the best part? Homeowners were seeing immediate benefits. Instead of being bled dry by pointless fines, they were actually getting services that improved their quality of life. But not everyone was thrilled about the new direction. A small group of Karren's former allies, bitter about losing their grip on the community, started stirring up trouble. They didn't have any real power anymore, but that didn't stop them from trying to undermine the new HOA leadership. One of them, a man named Gerald, had been Karren's right-hand enforcer. He had been the type to patrol the neighborhood with a clipboard, eagerly documenting supposed violations to report back to the HOA. Now that his position of influence was gone, he was struggling to accept the loss. He started spreading rumors that the new leadership was reckless, claiming that without Karren's strict rules, the neighborhood would fall into chaos. He even went as far as to say that property values would plummet because people were no longer being kept in check. At first, no one paid him much attention. But when he started harassing residents directly, it became clear that he wasn't going to go away quietly. One evening, he cornered a young couple who had just moved into the neighborhood, telling them that they had made a mistake buying a home here. He warned them that without Karren's leadership, they'd soon regret their decision. That was the final straw. The HOA board called an official meeting to address Gerald's behavior. Unlike Karren's meetings, where she had controlled every aspect and silenced opposition, this one was open and transparent. Residents were free to voice their concerns, and Gerald was given the chance to explain himself. He tried to paint himself as a concerned citizen, claiming he was only looking out for the neighborhood's best interests. But when he was confronted with the fact that property values had actually increased since Karren's departure and that crime rates had remained steady, his argument fell apart. The board took a vote, and the decision was unanimous. Gerald was banned from holding any future position within the HOA. He was also given a formal warning that harassment of residents would not be tolerated. With Gerald effectively neutralized, the last remnants of Karren's influence faded. The HOA could finally move forward without interference. As the months passed, the neighborhood continued to thrive. The annual block party, which Karren had previously restricted to a select group of residents, was now open to everyone. For the first time, people from all walks of life came together, celebrating as a true community. A retired veteran grilled burgers, a local musician played guitar, and kids ran around with sparklers as the sun set. I stood near the clubhouse, watching the scene unfold. The very place where Karren had tried to ruin my family reunion was now the heart of the community, no longer controlled by a power-hungry dictator. One of my neighbors, an elderly woman who had lived in the neighborhood since its early days, approached me. She had been one of the quiet ones during Karren's reign, too afraid to speak up. She smiled warmly. "I haven't seen the neighborhood like this in years. Thank you for what you've done." I nodded, feeling a deep satisfaction. It wasn't just me. It was all of us. And that was the truth. Karren had tried to control everything, believing she was the foundation that held the neighborhood together. But in the end, it was the people working together, supporting each other, that made it strong. With the past finally behind us, the future of the neighborhood looked brighter than ever. With Gerald finally out of the picture, the last remnants of Karren's influence had been scrubbed from existence. The neighborhood had fully embraced the new era of fairness and transparency, and for the first time in years, people actually felt like they had control over their own homes. The transformation was undeniable. Families that had once kept to themselves out of fear of being reported for some minor violation were now freely interacting with their neighbors. The community had become tighter, unified not by fear, but by a shared determination to keep things fair and functional. The best part? The HOA meetings had gone from tense and combative affairs to productive discussions where people actually felt heard. Issues were addressed, budgets were discussed openly, and decisions were made based on what the residents actually wanted. Gone were the days of arbitrary rule changes and unexplained fee increases. The new board had made sure of that. But just when I thought everything had settled, I received an unexpected letter in the mail. It was from Karren's lawyer. At first, I assumed it was some desperate last-ditch attempt to reclaim power, but when I read through the letter, I realized it was something else entirely. Karren had finally accepted her losses, but instead of disappearing quietly, she had one last trick up her sleeve. She was offering to sell her house directly to me. It was a calculated move on her part. She knew that, as the person who had systematically dismantled her empire, I was the last person who would want her lingering influence anywhere near the neighborhood. And in her mind, she figured I would be willing to pay a premium just to make sure she never set foot here again. She was right about one thing: I didn't want her anywhere near this place ever again. But she was dead wrong if she thought I was going to let her dictate the terms. I wasn't about to overpay for anything, especially not a house that had become a symbol of everything wrong with the old HOA. But the idea of owning it? That had potential. Karren had spent years using that house as her personal throne, lording over everyone from behind its pristine white fence. It was only fitting that, if she was going to leave, she would be replaced by someone who actually cared about the community. So I made her an offer, one that was fair, but far from the inflated price she was likely expecting. Predictably, she tried to negotiate. Her lawyer sent back a counteroffer, tacking on ridiculous conditions like a 6-month transition period where she could still access the property while she made arrangements. That was never going to happen. I declined her terms outright, making it clear that if she wanted to sell, she would do so immediately, no strings attached. She must have realized she had no leverage left, because a few days later, I got word that she had accepted. And just like that, Karren's reign over the neighborhood came to a definitive end. The house was mine, but I wasn't interested in keeping it for myself. For all the damage Karren had done, the house itself was just a building. What mattered was what it could become. I decided to turn it into something that would actually benefit the community, a shared space that could be used for gatherings, workshops, and even small business pop-ups for local entrepreneurs. It was poetic justice in the best way possible. The very house where Karren had plotted her petty power plays would now serve as a hub for the very people she had tried to control. Word spread quickly, and the neighborhood embraced the idea wholeheartedly. Volunteers came forward to help with renovations, donating time, materials, and expertise. What had once been the most unapproachable house in the neighborhood was now being transformed into something welcoming and useful. The final touch was removing the towering hedge Karren had planted around the property, her last attempt at keeping herself isolated from the people she had ruled over. As the hedge came down, people gathered to watch, cheering as the last physical barrier of Karren's rule was finally erased. With that, the neighborhood's transformation was complete. The community had gone from a place of rigid control and fear to one of cooperation and support. The HOA, once a tool for oppression, had become a functional system that actually worked for the people it was meant to serve. And Karren? She was nothing more than a bad memory, one that no longer had any power over the place she had once tried to dominate. As I stood in front of what was once her house, watching families gather for an outdoor movie night on the newly repurposed lawn, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. She had tried to control everything. She had tried to silence people. She had tried to break the community apart. But in the end, all she had done was make it stronger.